The brain in a vat. Imagine waking up in a laboratory, but something feels off. You try to move your hands, but nothing happens. You attempt to speak, but there's no sound. Then, a voice echoes around you, seemingly from nowhere. It tells you something impossible, something terrifying. Your entire life has been a simulation. You are nothing more than a brain in a vat, connected to a computer generating every experience you've ever had. At first, you'd resist the idea. Surely, you'd know if your reality was fake. You'd see the glitches, the inconsistencies. But would you? If every sensation, every memory, every interaction was carefully programmed, how could you ever distinguish the illusion from reality? What if you've been nothing but a mind floating in darkness all along? This is the brain in a vat thought experiment, a question that has haunted philosophers, scientists, and even computer engineers for centuries. It forces us to ask, how do we know anything is real? And if reality itself can be faked so convincingly, does it even matter? The roots of this unsettling idea stretch back to the 17th century, to the mind of René Descartes. Descartes famously declared, "Cogito, ergo sum." I think, therefore I am. He proposed that the only thing we can be truly certain of is our own thinking mind. Everything else? Suspect. The world around you, the people you meet, even the sensations of your own body. These could all be deceptions. Descartes imagined a powerful evil demon capable of manipulating all his perceptions, feeding him an entirely false world. Centuries later, this idea evolved into a modern version, the brain in a vat. Instead of a demon, we have a futuristic supercomputer. Instead of magic, we have wires and neural impulses. If scientists could perfectly simulate every input to your brain, sight, sound, touch, even emotion, how would that be any different from living in the real world? To some, this is just an eerie thought experiment. But to others, it raises deep concerns about what we call reality. Let's say you are, right now, a brain in a vat. How would you prove it? Could you ever? You might try something simple. Reach out and touch the world around you. But here's the problem. Every sensation you experience is just electrical signals interpreted by your brain. If an advanced enough machine could manipulate those signals, it could trick you into feeling anything. The coolness of metal, the warmth of sunlight, the taste of morning coffee, it could all be illusions. Some philosophers argue that this thought experiment is inherently flawed. The great Ludwig Wittgenstein claimed that if you were trapped in a false reality with no way to compare it to a true one, then the question itself is meaningless. If you can never disprove that you're in a simulation, does it even matter? But others argue the opposite, that the mere possibility should terrify us. Philosophy is one thing, but could this actually happen? The unsettling answer is maybe. Modern neuroscience has shown that the brain operates entirely on electrical impulses. Every thought, every feeling, every image you see is just a pattern of neurons firing. In theory, if a computer could perfectly replicate those signals, it could create a world so convincing that no one inside it would ever question its authenticity. In fact, we are already taking the first steps toward such technology. Scientists have successfully created brain-machine interfaces that allow people to control robotic limbs just by thinking. Virtual reality headsets are becoming more immersive by the year, and experiments in neuroprosthetics have enabled blind individuals to see through electrical stimulation. The line between biological perception and artificial manipulation is already beginning to blur. If a mere few decades of technological progress can bring us this far, what might we achieve in 100 years? 1,000? The concept of a fully simulated reality is no longer confined to philosophy. It's an actual scientific question. Now comes the most disturbing question of all. What if this has already happened? The simulation hypothesis, proposed by philosopher Nick Bostrom, suggests that if future civilizations ever develop the ability to create perfect simulations, they would likely create millions of them. If that's the case, then statistically speaking, the odds that we are living in the one real universe instead of one of the countless simulations are astronomically low. Think about that. If advanced beings, or even future humans, have the ability to create entire simulated worlds, why would we assume our reality is the original? After all, we are already trying to simulate consciousness with AI. What if we are the simulation, and our creators are watching from above? Some scientists have even suggested ways to test this theory. Theoretical physicists propose that tiny glitches in the structure of our universe, such as inconsistencies in the speed of light or unexplained quantum anomalies, could be evidence of computational limits in the code of reality itself. If we ever detect such a flaw, it could be the first proof that our world is no more real than a high-tech video game. If we are just brains in vats, living in an elaborate illusion, does it change anything? Would life lose its meaning? Or would it mean that meaning is whatever we choose it to be? Some argue that even if our world is a simulation, it doesn't make our experiences any less real to us. Love, pain, joy, fear, whether they are programmed or organic, they still shape who we are. Others find the idea deeply unsettling. If reality can be faked, can our very sense of self be faked too? Are we just characters in someone else's experiment, doomed never to know the truth? The brain in a vat. Thought experiment leaves us with more questions than answers. But one thing is certain. The mere fact that we can ask these questions proves at least one thing. Cogito, ergo sum. Or does it? The problem of other minds. Imagine walking through a crowded street, passing hundreds of people, some rushing, some wandering, some lost in thought. You see their faces, their expressions, their gestures, and yet a haunting question lingers. Are they truly conscious? Or are they just sophisticated machines, reacting to stimuli without any real awareness? You assume they think and feel just as you do, but what if you're wrong? What if everyone around you is just an illusion of consciousness, a simulation of life, while you alone possess the spark of awareness? This is the problem of other minds, a philosophical conundrum that forces us to confront the unsettling reality that we can never truly know whether anyone else experiences life the way we do. While we can observe behaviors, words, and emotions, we have no direct access to the thoughts of others. Our entire perception of reality is filtered through our own consciousness, leaving us trapped within ourselves, eternally uncertain about whether we are truly alone in the universe. The problem arises because our understanding of consciousness is purely subjective. You know you are conscious because you experience thoughts, sensations, and emotions firsthand. But when you look at another person, all you see is their outward behavior. They may claim to feel pain, sadness, or joy, but how can you be sure they actually experience those emotions? Could they merely be responding in a way that mimics consciousness without actually possessing it? This question has baffled philosophers for centuries. René Descartes famously said, "I think, therefore I am." But he could never extend that certainty to others. If all we can ever truly verify is our own consciousness, then everything outside of our own mind is, at best, a plausible assumption. The unsettling implication is that the entire world around you, every person, every conversation, every connection, could be nothing more than an elaborate performance, an illusion created for reasons unknown. Consider this. What if other people are not just pretending to be conscious, but are incapable of being conscious at all? Philosophers call this the philosophical zombie argument, a thought experiment in which you imagine a being that looks, talks, and acts exactly like a normal human but lacks any inner experience. A philosophical zombie could tell you it loves you, laugh at your jokes, and cry at a funeral, but all of it would be empty, mechanical, without true feeling. How, then, can you prove that the people around you are not just incredibly advanced biological machines, reacting to stimuli without any awareness behind their eyes? The implications of this question stretch far beyond simple curiosity. If consciousness is unknowable beyond our own experience, then what does that say about morality? We assume that harming another being is wrong because they can feel pain. But if we cannot confirm their experience, then morality itself becomes uncertain. Are we protecting true consciousness, or just responding to programmed reactions? This problem is not just theoretical, it has real-world consequences. Consider artificial intelligence. As AI advances, it becomes harder to distinguish machine from man. Chatbots can hold conversations, robots can mimic emotions, and deep learning algorithms can simulate human behavior. But do these machines feel anything? Or are they just increasingly convincing imitations of human consciousness? If we struggle to prove that other humans are truly aware, how will we ever determine if a machine has crossed the threshold into true consciousness? Even within human existence, the problem manifests in strange ways. Locked-in syndrome, for instance, is a condition where a person is fully conscious but unable to move or communicate. From the outside, they may appear unresponsive, leading some to assume they lack awareness. But trapped within, their mind remains fully active, screaming into the void. The horrifying reality is that we judge consciousness based on external signals, yet those signals are unreliable. What if millions of people are trapped in silence, dismissed as unconscious simply because they cannot prove otherwise? Some argue that social interactions provide proof of consciousness. After all, if others react in ways that mirror our own thoughts and emotions, isn't that enough evidence that they, too, are conscious? But this argument assumes that outward behavior correlates with inner experience, which is precisely what the philosophical zombie scenario challenges. If something can perfectly mimic consciousness without possessing it, then behavior alone cannot be proof of awareness. Science attempts to address this problem, but it, too, faces limitations. Neuroscientists can measure brain activity, track neural responses, and even map the pathways of thought. But they cannot see consciousness itself. A brain scan can show patterns of activity when a person is in pain, but it cannot confirm that the person is actually experiencing suffering. The subjective nature of consciousness means that no amount of external observation can ever truly bridge the gap between knowing and assuming. Now, consider the implications if we take this problem to its extreme. If we cannot confirm that others are conscious, what if, instead of just doubting a few individuals, we doubted everyone? What if you were the only conscious being in the universe, surrounded by billions of soulless imitations? This is the concept of solipsism, the belief that only one's own mind is certain to exist. Everything else, from the stars in the sky to the people you love, could be a mere projection of your own consciousness. If you are the only real being, then what does that say about the meaning of your relationships, your emotions, your fears? Are they genuine, or are they simply constructs created to give your isolated existence the illusion of companionship? Most people instinctively reject this idea. They cling to the belief that their loved ones are just as conscious as they are, that their friends and family possess real emotions and awareness. And yet, this belief remains just that, a belief. No evidence, no proof, just a deeply held assumption that the world around us is real and populated by minds as rich and complex as our own. But what if you woke up tomorrow and discovered it was all an illusion? What if, in some distant future, scientists revealed that they had placed your brain inside a simulation and that every interaction you ever had was just an elaborate construct? Would you feel betrayed? Or would it even matter? If your entire life had been experienced as real, then does it change anything if it wasn't? The problem of other minds leaves us in a state of perpetual uncertainty. We live our lives assuming we are not alone, but we can never prove it. We love, we hurt, we share, we connect, all while never truly knowing if the ones we hold close actually feel the same way. We accept their consciousness on faith, because the alternative is too isolating to bear. So, as you walk through that crowded street, passing strangers, friends, and loved ones, ask yourself, are they truly aware? Or are you the only mind that has ever existed, dreaming endlessly in the dark? Chapter 3. The Simulation Argument. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that everything around you, your home, your family, the sky above, was nothing more than an elaborate illusion. What if your entire existence was not real in the way you believed, but instead a hyper-advanced simulation designed by forces beyond your comprehension? This is the unsettling premise of the simulation argument, a hypothesis that has captivated philosophers, scientists, and futurists alike. It suggests that the reality you experience might not be fundamental, but rather a construct, a meticulously crafted digital environment running on some unfathomably advanced system. This idea is not merely a product of science fiction. It has deep philosophical roots and has been seriously entertained by prominent thinkers. The argument, popularized by philosopher Nick Bostrom, proposes a trilemma. Either, 1, civilizations never reach the level of technology required to simulate reality. 2, they do but choose not to run such simulations. Or 3, we are almost certainly living in one. The implications of this are staggering. If simulations are possible and widely run, then the probability of any one consciousness being real rather than simulated approaches 0. Consider video games. In just a few decades, our ability to create immersive, realistic environments has advanced exponentially. What was once pixelated sprites on a screen has evolved into near photorealistic digital worlds. Given enough time, centuries, millennia, would it not be reasonable to assume that a sufficiently advanced civilization could create a simulation indistinguishable from reality? If this is the case, how would you ever know that you were inside one? One of the biggest challenges in proving or disproving the simulation hypothesis is the nature of our own perception. Every sensory input, sight, sound, touch, is interpreted by your brain. If you were inside a simulation, your experience would still feel completely real to you, because reality is, fundamentally, whatever your brain perceives it to be. Even if you were nothing more than a sophisticated line of code, you would still feel, think, and exist exactly as you do now. Let some have proposed potential glitches or evidence that could hint at the artificial nature of reality. The existence of seemingly arbitrary fundamental constants in physics, the possibility of pixelation at the smallest scales of the universe, or even the bizarre implications of quantum mechanics, all have been cited as possible indicators that we are living in a programmed environment. If the universe were a simulation, we might expect to find limits to its resolution, much like pixels on a screen when zoomed in far enough. But even if we are in a simulation, does it change anything? If this reality is all we have ever known, does it matter whether it is base reality or an artificial construct? Some argue that it makes no difference. Reality is simply what we experience, regardless of its origin. Others, however, believe that discovering the truth of our existence would be the most profound revelation in human history, proof that our universe was designed, even if not by a god in the traditional sense. There is also the question of the simulator itself. If we are in a simulation, who or what is running it? Are we the product of an advanced post-human civilization studying their ancestors? Are we the entertainment of some incomprehensible intelligence? Or could it be something even stranger, that our reality exists for reasons beyond our ability to fathom? Perhaps the most chilling possibility is that we are in a simulation and that it could be turned off at any moment. Just as we shut down video games when they no longer interest us, what if the entity running our universe decides to do the same? Would we simply cease to exist? Or would we wake up somewhere else, realizing that this life was just one layer of a greater reality? The simulation argument remains one of the most haunting and mind-expanding ideas in modern thought. It forces us to reconsider what we know, what we assume, and what we can ever truly prove. So, as you close your eyes tonight and drift into sleep, ask yourself, is this the real world, or merely shadows on the walls of an unseen machine? Chapter 4. The Twin Earth Thought Experiment. Imagine a world eerily similar to our own. It has blue skies, towering mountains, and vast oceans teeming with life. The people on this planet speak a language indistinguishable from ours, live in cities nearly identical to those on Earth, and even share our scientific knowledge and cultural traditions. This place, known in philosophy as Twin Earth, is not a mere fantasy. It is a thought experiment designed to challenge our very understanding of meaning, language, and reality. The Twin Earth thought experiment was first proposed by philosopher Hilary Putnam in 1975 as a way to explore the relationship between meaning and reference. The core idea is deceptively simple. Suppose there exists a planet that is exactly like Earth in every way except for one crucial difference: the chemical composition of water. On Earth, water is H2O, composed of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. But on twin Earth, the substance that appears identical to water behaves like water and is used by twin Earth inhabitants just as we use water, has a different chemical composition. Let's call it XYZ. At first glance, this might seem like an insignificant change. The inhabitants of twin Earth, just like us, call their clear, drinkable liquid water. They use it to quench their thirst, to cook, to bathe, and to sustain their ecosystems. To them, it is just as essential as water is to us. But here's the paradox. If an Earthling and a twin Earthling both say the word water, are they referring to the same thing? If meaning is determined solely by our internal mental states, then both individuals should mean the same thing when they use the word. However, if meaning is determined by external reality, the actual substance they are referring to, then they are talking about different things. This distinction has profound implications for how we understand language and meaning. If 2 people can have identical mental experiences but refer to different substances, then meaning cannot be purely a matter of mental content. Instead, it must be at least partially grounded in the external world. Putnam famously summarized this idea with the phrase, "Meaning just ain't in the head." The thought experiment extends beyond just water. Imagine that every natural kind, gold, trees, even human beings, had a twin Earth counterpart that was subtly different at the molecular level. Would the meanings of these words change depending on their external properties? If so, then our understanding of the world is fundamentally tied to the nature of reality itself, rather than just our subjective experiences. This idea challenges centuries of philosophical thought about language, particularly the notion of descriptivism, the belief that the meaning of a term is determined by a set of descriptions associated with it. According to descriptivism, the word water means something like a clear, drinkable liquid found in lakes, rivers, and oceans. But if twin Earth's water fits this description perfectly, yet is chemically different, then the descriptivist account of meaning fails. Instead, Putnam's argument supports what is known as semantic externalism, the idea that the meaning of a word is at least partly determined by factors outside the speaker's mind. This view has significant consequences for philosophy, linguistics, and cognitive science. If meaning is externally determined, then understanding the world requires more than just knowing concepts. It requires engaging with the external reality those concepts describe. Consider the implications for artificial intelligence. If an AI learns language purely by processing patterns in text, but never interacts with the real world, can it ever truly understand what words mean? If meaning is tied to physical reference, then an AI that lacks sensory experience might only be manipulating symbols without true comprehension. The twin Earth experiment also raises deep questions about knowledge and skepticism. If 2 things can appear identical but be fundamentally different, how can we ever be certain about the nature of reality? Could we, like the inhabitants of twin Earth, be mistaken about the substances we interact with every day? Could there be deeper levels of reality that remain hidden from us, just as the chemical structure of water was hidden from ancient civilizations? Furthermore, this thought experiment aligns with themes from the simulation hypothesis. If our sensory experiences are all we have to rely on, how do we know they accurately reflect the underlying nature of the world? Could we be inhabiting a twin Earth scenario where everything seems real but is in fact subtly different from what we assume? Some philosophers have taken the thought experiment in even stranger directions. What if there were infinite twin Earths, each with slightly different variations of familiar substances? Could there be a world where water is not a liquid but a gas, or one where gold is soft rather than hard? If meaning is relative to the specific physical properties of a world, then every reality might come with its own unique language constraints, making true communication between different realities impossible. The twin Earth thought experiment remains one of the most haunting and provocative challenges in modern philosophy. It forces us to reconsider our assumptions about meaning, knowledge, and the relationship between mind and world. As you drift off to sleep tonight, consider this. If you were on twin Earth right now, how would you ever know? And if there is no way to tell, does it even matter? Chapter 5. The Ship of Theseus and the Identity Paradox. The Ship of Theseus is one of the most perplexing philosophical paradoxes concerning identity and change. The thought experiment, originating from ancient Greece, asks whether an object that has had all its components replaced remains fundamentally the same object. If a ship's wooden planks are replaced one by one until none of the original planks remain, is it still the same ship? And if all the removed planks are then reassembled into a second ship, which of the two is the real ship of Theseus? This paradox challenges our understanding of identity over time. If something can change completely and yet still be considered the same, then what truly defines its essence? Philosophers have debated this question for centuries, offering various interpretations and resolutions. One common perspective comes from the idea of continuity. Some argue that the ship remains the same because its changes are gradual and preserve its function. Just as humans replace cells over time but maintain a continuous sense of self, the ship retains its identity through a historical connection. However, the paradox grows even more complex when considering digital and biological identities. If a person receives an organ transplant or even a full-body reconstruction, do they remain the same individual? If a computer's hardware is completely replaced, but it runs the same software, is it still the same machine? Modern applications of the paradox extend to fields like artificial intelligence, where digital consciousness and memory transfers present new challenges to defining identity. If an AI's code is entirely rewritten while maintaining the same operations and data, does it remain the same AI? Ultimately, the Ship of Theseus forces us to confront the nature of identity itself. Is it tied to physical components, continuity of existence, or something more abstract like memory and function? The question remains open-ended, inviting endless exploration and debate. Chapter 6. Time and its Illusions. Time is one of the most fundamental aspects of our reality, yet its true nature remains one of the greatest mysteries in philosophy and physics. We experience time as a constant forward flow, an unstoppable march from past to future. But is this experience real or just an illusion? Throughout history, thinkers have debated whether time truly exists as an independent entity or whether it is merely a human construct, a byproduct of our limited perception. Ancient civilizations measured time through celestial movements, tracking the sun, moon, and stars, to create calendars and divide existence into past, present, and future. But does time truly function as a straight line? Many physicists and philosophers argue that what we perceive as the passage of time might be an illusion, a trick played by our brains in an attempt to organize reality. One of the most famous theories challenging our understanding of time is Einstein's theory of relativity. According to relativity, time is not an absolute constant, but rather a flexible dimension that changes based on speed and gravity. This means that time moves differently depending on where you are and how fast you're traveling. Astronauts who spend extended periods in space actually age slightly less than people on Earth due to this phenomenon, known as time dilation. In other words, time is relative, not universal. This has profound implications for our concept of reality. If time is malleable, does it even exist in the way we think it does? Could time, rather than flowing like a river, exist all at once, with past, present, and future existing simultaneously? Some theories suggest that our perception of time moving forward is merely a result of how our consciousness processes information, similar to how a movie reel consists of individual frames but appears as a continuous sequence when played. One of the most haunting questions about time is whether we have free will or if every moment is predetermined. If all time exists at once, then the future is already set, and every choice we believe we are making has already been made. This idea is supported by the block universe theory, which posits that past, present, and future exist together in a four-dimensional structure where time is just another coordinate, like space. In this model, free will is an illusion, as everything that has ever happened or will happen is already fixed in place. However, other interpretations suggest that the future remains undetermined until observed, echoing concepts from quantum mechanics. The famous Schrödinger's cat thought experiment demonstrates how, at a quantum level, events exist in multiple states until measured. Could this principle apply to time itself? If so, does that mean we create the future as we move through it, rather than merely experiencing an already determined path? The psychological perception of time adds another layer of mystery. Why does time seem to slow down during moments of extreme danger, yet speed up when we are deeply engaged in something enjoyable? Neuroscientists have found that our brains process time differently, depending on factors like emotion, attention, and memory. This suggests that time, as we experience it, is highly subjective and shaped by our own minds, rather than being a fixed, external force. Philosophers such as Immanuel Kant proposed that time is not an inherent part of the external world, but rather a mental framework through which we interpret events. If this is true, then time may not exist independently, but instead be a construct of human consciousness, much like color or sound. In this view, reality might be timeless, and our perception of past and future is merely a way to make sense of existence. But if time is an illusion, what does that mean for aging and mortality? Are we truly moving toward an end, or are we simply shifting perspectives within an unchanging structure? Some interpretations suggest that death may not be a real end, but rather a transition into another frame of existence, much like flipping to another page in a book that already exists. Modern physics has also introduced radical ideas like the possibility of time travel. If time is a dimension like space, then theoretically, moving through time should be possible just as we move through physical space. Some solutions in Einstein's equations allow for closed time-like curves, which could permit backward time travel. However, these ideas introduce paradoxes, such as the grandfather paradox. If you traveled back in time and altered the past, could you erase your own existence? There is also the question of entropy, the concept from thermodynamics that states that disorder in a system always increases over time. Entropy provides one of the only explanations for why time appears to have a direction, known as the arrow of time. If the universe began in a highly ordered state and is constantly moving toward greater disorder, then this explains why we experience time as moving forward. But does this mean that time itself exists, or is it merely a reflection of underlying physical laws? Some physicists, like Julian Barbour, go even further and argue that time doesn't exist at all. According to Barbour's theory, what we perceive as time is just a series of distinct nows, each existing independently. In this view, there is no past or future, only a vast collection of present moments, like frames of a film existing all at once, with our consciousness creating the illusion of continuity. If true, this idea could mean that every moment of our lives still exists somewhere, eternally frozen in the fabric of reality. It also suggests that our perception of time moving forward is just a byproduct of how our minds process events, not an objective truth about the universe. So, as you close your eyes and drift into sleep, consider this. What if the present moment you are experiencing now is not truly moving toward a future, but rather a single still frame in an infinite collection of moments? If time is an illusion, then perhaps we are all already immortal, existing in a way we cannot yet comprehend. Chapter 7. The Brain and Consciousness. Consciousness is the most profound mystery of human existence. It is the one thing we experience most intimately, yet it remains one of the greatest enigmas in science and philosophy. What is consciousness? How does the brain generate it, if it does at all? Is consciousness purely a biological phenomenon, or does it transcend the physical world? These questions have fascinated thinkers for centuries, and despite significant advancements in neuroscience and cognitive science, the true nature of consciousness remains elusive. At its core, consciousness is the state of being aware of and able to think about one's own existence. But what exactly does that mean? We often take our ability to think, feel, and perceive for granted. But the simple act of being aware is an extraordinary phenomenon. Our brains receive vast amounts of sensory data every second, yet only a fraction of it reaches our conscious awareness. Most of what happens in our minds, thoughts, emotions, decisions, occurs beneath the surface, in the depths of the subconscious. So, why do we experience anything at all? One of the most haunting questions about consciousness is whether it is purely a product of the brain or something more fundamental to the universe. The dominant scientific perspective, known as materialism, asserts that consciousness arises from complex neural activity. According to this view, the brain is like a biological computer, and consciousness emerges from the intricate interactions between billions of neurons. But if that is the case, why does it feel like something to be alive? Why aren't we just mindless machines carrying out programmed responses? The hard problem of consciousness, as philosopher David Chalmers puts it, asks why physical processes in the brain should give rise to subjective experience. It is one thing to understand how the brain processes information, but it is an entirely different challenge to explain why that processing should result in feelings, emotions, and self-awareness. Why does seeing the color red feel different from hearing a sound? Why do we experience pain rather than just react to stimuli? The hard problem remains unresolved and challenges the very foundation of our understanding of the mind. Some philosophers and scientists propose that consciousness is not merely a byproduct of the brain, but a fundamental aspect of reality, much like space and time. This view, known as panpsychism, suggests that consciousness exists at all levels of nature, from atoms to human minds. In this framework, the brain does not create consciousness, but rather serves as a complex structure that organizes and focuses it. Could it be that the universe itself is conscious in some way? If so, what does that mean for our understanding of existence? Then there is the question of artificial intelligence and consciousness. As technology advances, we are rapidly developing AI systems that can mimic human intelligence, solve complex problems, and even engage in conversations. But can a machine ever be truly conscious? Could an artificial system ever experience emotions, thoughts, or self-awareness? If consciousness is merely a matter of computational complexity, then in theory, a sufficiently advanced AI could become conscious. However, if consciousness involves something beyond computation, something more mysterious, then true artificial consciousness may remain forever out of reach. Another unsettling question is whether our sense of self is an illusion. Some neuroscientists argue that the self is not a fixed entity, but rather a collection of constantly changing mental processes. Our thoughts, memories, and perceptions give rise to the illusion of a continuous self, but in reality, we are not the same person from moment to moment. Every experience alters the brain, shaping and reshaping our identities over time. If this is true, then what are we really? Are we just a momentary flicker of awareness, constantly shifting and changing? Some theories even suggest that consciousness could persist beyond physical death. Near-death experiences, reports of past life memories, and claims of out-of-body experiences all hint at the possibility that consciousness is not strictly tied to the brain. While mainstream science remains skeptical, the idea that consciousness might survive the death of the body has intrigued people across cultures for millennia. Could it be that our awareness continues in some form after we die? Or are these experiences merely hallucinations produced by a dying brain? Regardless of where the answers lie, one thing is certain: consciousness is one of the greatest frontiers of human inquiry. Whether it is an emergent property of the brain, a fundamental aspect of the universe, or something else entirely, understanding consciousness will revolutionize our understanding of reality itself. Chapter 8: Free Will and Determinism. The question of free will is one of the most profound and unsettling philosophical dilemmas humanity has ever faced. Are we truly the authors of our own actions, or are our choices merely the inevitable outcomes of physical and chemical processes beyond our control? The tension between free will and determinism has captivated thinkers for centuries, and as science advances, the debate only becomes more complex. At first glance, free will seems self-evident. We experience ourselves as agents, capable of making decisions, weighing alternatives, and choosing between different courses of action. When you decide to pick up a glass of water or take a different route to work, it feels as though you are in control. But is this feeling of control real, or is it merely an illusion created by the brain? Determinism argues that every event, including human thought and action, is the result of preceding causes. Just as a rolling billiard ball follows the laws of physics, so too do our brains operate under the laws of chemistry and biology. According to this view, if we could know the exact state of every particle in the universe, we could, in theory, predict the future with absolute certainty. Your decisions, no matter how personal or spontaneous they feel, were set in motion long before you were even born. Neuroscience adds an even more disturbing layer to this debate. Experiments have shown that the brain makes decisions before we are consciously aware of them. In the 1980s, Benjamin Libet conducted studies that measured brain activity preceding conscious decision-making. His research found that neural activity associated with movement occurred before participants reported making a conscious choice to move. If our brains decide before we do, where does that leave free will? But determinism is not without its challenges. Chaos theory, quantum mechanics, and the unpredictability of human behavior complicate the idea of a fully predetermined universe. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that, at a fundamental level, reality is not deterministic, but probabilistic. If randomness exists in the universe, does that leave room for free will? Or does it simply replace strict causality with randomness, neither of which grants us true autonomy? Another perspective, compatibilism, attempts to reconcile free will and determinism. Compatibilists argue that even if our choices are determined by prior causes, we can still consider ourselves free as long as we act according to our own desires and reasoning. In other words, as long as we are not being coerced or manipulated, we can still be said to have free will, even if our choices are ultimately inevitable. But is that enough? Or is free will meaningless if we cannot choose otherwise? The implications of this debate extend far beyond philosophy. If we lack free will, what does that mean for morality, justice, and personal responsibility? Can we truly blame criminals for their actions if they had no real choice in the matter? Should we still praise people for their achievements if their successes were predetermined? The very foundation of legal and ethical systems depends on the assumption that people are responsible for their actions. But if free will is an illusion, does it make sense to punish or reward anyone? Some thinkers argue that, illusion or not, belief in free will is necessary for a functional society. Studies suggest that when people are told they do not have free will, they are more likely to behave unethically, cheat, and act selfishly. If believing in free will encourages moral behavior, then perhaps it is a useful fiction, one we should maintain regardless of its truth. Yet, there are those who take comfort in determinism. If all actions are inevitable, then guilt, regret, and self-blame lose their meaning. If you could not have done otherwise, why punish yourself for past mistakes? Perhaps embracing determinism can lead to greater compassion, both for ourselves and others. Instead of seeing people as inherently good or evil, we might come to view them as products of their circumstances, shaped by forces beyond their control. Whether free will exists or not, the question itself reveals deep truths about the human experience. Our desire for autonomy, our search for meaning, and our moral frameworks all hinge on this profound and unsettling mystery. And if the answer remains forever out of reach, perhaps that, in itself, is part of what makes us human. Chapter 9. The Nature of Time. Time is perhaps the most fundamental yet perplexing concept in human experience. We live our lives according to it, measure it with precision, and yet struggle to define what it truly is. Is time a fundamental part of reality, flowing like a river, or is it simply a construct of the human mind? Does it have a beginning and an end, or is it infinite? These questions have haunted scientists, philosophers, and thinkers for centuries, and as our understanding of physics deepens, the mysteries of time only seem to grow. At first glance, time appears simple. The past is what has already happened, the present is what is happening now, and the future is what has yet to come. But is this division real, or is it merely an illusion? Albert Einstein's theory of relativity shattered the conventional view of time, showing that it is not absolute but relative. Time moves differently depending on speed and gravity. A person traveling at near light speed would experience time much more slowly than someone on Earth. This raises profound questions. If time is not universal, what does that mean for our understanding of reality? One of the most unsettling implications of relativity is the block universe theory. According to this view, past, present, and future all exist simultaneously in a four-dimensional space-time continuum. If true, this means that the future is already written, and the flow of time is just an illusion created by human consciousness. This would imply that free will is an illusion, as every event has already taken place within the fabric of space-time. But what about the arrow of time? The fact that we experience time moving forward and never backward. The laws of physics, from Newton's mechanics to Einstein's relativity, are time-symmetric, meaning they work the same way whether time moves forward or backward. Yet, in our daily lives, we only see time move in one direction. This phenomenon is best explained by entropy, the measure of disorder in a system. The second law of thermodynamics states that entropy always increases, which explains why eggs break but never unbreak, why smoke spreads but never regathers, and why we remember the past but not the future. But why did time start with low entropy? Was it a cosmic accident, or is there something deeper at play? Quantum mechanics further complicates our understanding of time. Some interpretations suggest that time does not exist at the quantum level, while others propose that every possible future already exists in a superposition, and our experience of time is simply the act of moving through these possibilities. The famous delayed choice quantum eraser experiment shows that decisions made in the present can seemingly affect the past at the quantum level. If true, does this mean time is not as rigid as we believe? There are also theories that suggest time may not be fundamental at all. Some physicists propose that time is an emergent property, arising from more basic laws of physics we have yet to discover. If time is merely a byproduct of deeper structures, what does that mean for our perception of reality? Could our experience of moving through time be a limitation of human consciousness rather than an intrinsic property of the universe? Then there is the question of time travel. General relativity allows for the possibility of closed time-like curves, paths through space-time that loop back on themselves, theoretically allowing an object to travel to its own past. The idea of wormholes, shortcuts through space-time, has been explored as a potential mechanism for time travel. But even if time travel were possible, it raises paradoxes such as the grandfather paradox. If you travel back in time and prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother, would you ever be born? Some physicists suggest that quantum mechanics might resolve such paradoxes by allowing for multiple timelines or parallel universes. Our relationship with time also extends into the philosophical realm. Does time truly exist, or is it merely a concept created by human minds to make sense of change? The ancient philosopher Parmenides argued that change itself is an illusion and that all moments exist simultaneously. In contrast, Heraclitus believed that everything is in constant flux, that time is a fundamental force shaping reality. Which perspective is correct? The more we investigate time, the more it seems to slip through our fingers. We experience it, measure it, and even try to manipulate it, but its true nature remains elusive. If time is an illusion, then what does that mean for our memories, our choices, and the very fabric of our existence? Perhaps time is both real and unreal, fundamental and emergent, flowing and frozen, all at once. And if that is the case, then the mystery of time may never be fully solved, only contemplated in wonder. Chapter 10. The Philosophy of the Multiverse. The idea that our universe is not the only one, that it exists as just one of countless realities within a vast multiverse, has fascinated philosophers, scientists, and storytellers alike. But beyond its use in science fiction, the concept of the multiverse raises some of the deepest questions about existence, free will, and the very nature of reality. Philosophically, the multiverse challenges the notion of a singular, absolute reality. If there are infinite universes, each with different physical laws, different histories, and perhaps even different versions of ourselves, what does that mean for our sense of identity? Are we unique individuals, or are we simply one of many variations of the same consciousness scattered across infinite realities? In quantum mechanics, the idea of parallel universes emerges from the many worlds interpretation. According to this theory, every time a quantum event occurs, such as a particle existing in one state or another, the universe splits, creating two or more divergent timelines. In one, a cat in Schrödinger's famous thought experiment is alive. In another, it is dead. Extrapolate this to every event in history, and suddenly, every possible outcome of every decision exists in some parallel universe. The implications of this are staggering. If every choice spawns a new branch of reality, then somewhere out there exists a universe where you made every decision differently. There's a version of you who took that job offer, a version who never met your best friend, a version who won the lottery, and a version who never even existed at all. But quantum physics is not the only place where the multiverse appears. Some cosmological theories suggest that our universe is just one bubble in an infinite cosmic foam. According to the theory of eternal inflation, new universes are constantly forming, each with different physical properties. Some may be almost identical to ours. Others might be governed by laws we cannot even comprehend. In some, life might not be possible at all. In others, it might have evolved into forms beyond imagination. If the multiverse is real, it raises profound questions about meaning and purpose. Does it render our choices insignificant, knowing that every possibility plays out somewhere else? Or does it mean that everything that can happen must happen, giving reality a kind of infinite richness? Some thinkers argue that the multiverse could even provide an answer to the problem of fine-tuning, why our universe seems so perfectly calibrated for life. If infinite universes exist, then at least one was bound to produce the conditions necessary for conscious beings like us to emerge. Of course, not everyone is convinced. Critics argue that the multiverse is an unfalsifiable concept, one that cannot be tested through experiment. If other universes exist beyond our observable horizon, how could we ever confirm their existence? Some physicists view the multiverse as a philosophical curiosity rather than a scientific theory. Without concrete evidence, it remains speculative, a playground for thought rather than a proven reality. And yet, the multiverse refuses to go away. It appears in string theory, in black hole physics, in computer simulations. Some argue that if we ever reach the level of technology necessary to create perfect virtual worlds, we might be able to simulate entire universes ourselves, perhaps even discover that our own reality is one such simulation within a greater multiverse. If we are living in a multiverse, what does that mean for our understanding of death? Some interpretations suggest that consciousness could persist in alternate universes, meaning that from a subjective perspective, one might never truly cease to exist. Every time we face a life or death moment, there could be another reality where we survive. While this idea is purely speculative, it echoes ancient philosophical questions about the continuity of self and the possibility of an afterlife. Ultimately, whether the multiverse is real or not, it forces us to confront the limits of our understanding. It challenges us to think beyond our immediate experience, to consider the vastness of possibility, and to question what it truly means to exist. Perhaps, in some distant parallel world, a version of you is pondering these same questions right now, wondering whether their universe is truly the only one or just one thread in an infinite cosmic tapestry. Chapter 11. The Illusion of Self. The idea that the self, the very thing we take for granted as our identity, is an illusion, is one of the most unsettling and profound concepts in philosophy. Most of us believe that we are stable, continuous entities, the same person from childhood to adulthood, bound together by our memories, experiences, and sense of agency. But what if that belief is just a convenient fiction, a byproduct of evolution that helps us survive rather than a fundamental truth? Many philosophical and scientific perspectives suggest that the self is not what it appears to be. Some argue that it is a construct of the brain, an emergent property of neural processes that gives us the illusion of continuity and control. Others suggest that the self is an illusion because it cannot be pinned down to a single, unchanging entity. If you try to locate the I in your mind, where do you find it? Is it in your thoughts, your emotions, your memories? Every aspect of your identity is constantly changing, yet you still feel like a unified being. One of the most well-known perspectives on the illusion of self comes from Buddhism. According to the doctrine of anatta, or not-self, there is no permanent, unchanging core to our being. Instead, what we call the self is merely a collection of ever-changing sensations, perceptions, thoughts, and consciousness, all arising and passing away moment by moment. The belief in a stable self, Buddhism argues, is the source of suffering, as it leads to attachment and fear of loss. Modern neuroscience supports this idea in striking ways. Studies show that the brain is constantly rewriting our memories, changing our perceptions, and fabricating a sense of continuity where none actually exists. The self we experience is constructed from moment to moment, pieced together by different neural networks. Some experiments even suggest that our decisions are made by the brain before we are consciously aware of them, raising the question of whether we are truly in control of our actions at all. One particularly fascinating insight into the illusion of self comes from split brain experiments. When the corpus callosum, the bridge between the left and right hemispheres of the brain, is severed, the two halves of the brain can no longer communicate. Patients with this condition often display bizarre behaviors, such as one hand acting independently from the other, as if controlled by a separate consciousness. Even more strikingly, when researchers ask questions to one hemisphere at a time, they receive different answers, as if two different selves exist within the same body. This suggests that what we call the self is just a narrative created by the brain to unify disparate processes. Philosopher Derek Parfit pushed this idea even further, arguing that personal identity is not what we think it is. He used thought experiments, such as teleportation scenarios, to challenge our notions of self. Imagine a teleportation device that scans your body, destroys it, and reconstructs an identical copy on Mars. Would you still be you? If the copy has all your memories, thoughts, and personality, does it matter that the original was destroyed? Parfit argued that there is no deep, unchanging self, only a collection of mental states and experiences that continue over time. The implications of the self being an illusion are profound. If we are not stable, continuous beings, what does that mean for concepts like personal responsibility, free will, and morality? If the self is just a story the brain tells itself, then who, or what, is actually experiencing reality? And if the sense of self can change or even disappear under certain conditions, such as meditation or brain injury, what does that say about its true nature? Some find the idea of the illusory self liberating. If there is no fixed self, then there is no need to cling to a rigid identity, no need to fear death in the traditional sense. Others find it deeply unsettling, as it challenges the very foundation of how we understand ourselves and our place in the world. So, if the self is an illusion, what are we left with? Are we just a stream of consciousness without a true owner? A shifting collection of thoughts and memories bound together by nothing more than habit and perception? Or is there something more, something beyond what our current understanding can grasp? The illusion of self raises more questions than it answers, but perhaps that is its greatest gift, forcing us to question, to explore, and to seek a deeper understanding of what it truly means to exist.